The Silent Witness of Willow Creek, an Occura true crime special. Welcome, true crime aficionados, to Occura. Tonight, we delve into a chilling tale that echoes through the quiet, forgotten corners of America. A story of betrayal, a shattered family, and a truth buried beneath 20 years of silence. This is the case of Willow Creek and the silent witness who finally spoke. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a whimper. The whimper of a small town, Willow Creek, nestled deep within the Appalachian foothills. In the late 90s, Willow Creek was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. The air always smelled of damp earth and pine needles, and the morning mist clung to the valley floor like a heavy shroud. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, where doors were left unlocked, and the biggest crime was usually a stolen pie from a windowsill or a teenager caught with a six-pack behind the old mill. But on a crisp autumn morning, October 12, 1998, that idyllic facade shattered forever. Sarah Jenkins was the heart of Willow Creek. At 28, she was a vibrant, dedicated first-grade teacher at Willow Creek Elementary. She was the woman who stayed late to help a struggling student, the one who organized the annual Harvest Festival, and the person everyone turned to when they needed a kind word. When Sarah failed to show up for her morning class, the alarm bells didn't just ring, they screamed. By 9 a.m., the principal, Mr. Henderson, had already called Sarah's home 3 times. No answer. By 10 a.m., he was on the phone with Sheriff Brody. Sheriff Silas Brody was a man built like an old oak, sturdy, weathered, and deeply rooted in the community. He'd known Sarah since she was a toddler, watched her grow from a precocious child into the remarkable woman she'd become. He felt a sharp, cold knot tighten in his stomach as he drove up the winding dirt path to the Jenkins farmhouse. The farmhouse was a quaint, white-clapboard building with a wraparound porch, sitting on the edge of a vast, dark forest. To anyone passing by, it looked perfectly normal. Sarah's car, a reliable old Ford sedan, was parked in its usual spot. But as Brody stepped onto the porch, the silence was deafening. Even Buster, Sarah's usually boisterous golden retriever, was uncharacteristically quiet, whimpering softly behind the screen door. Brody entered the house. It was immaculate. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. On the kitchen table sat a half-finished cup of coffee, now cold. A book Sarah had been reading lay open on the sofa. Her purse, containing her wallet and ID, was sitting on the sideboard. Her keys were still hanging by the door. It was as if Sarah Jenkins had simply stepped out of her life and vanished into thin air. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity that gripped the entire county. Deputies, state police, and hundreds of volunteers scoured every inch of the surrounding woods. They dragged the deep, murky waters of Willow Creek. They used scent dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, and every forensic tool available in 1998. Sarah's parents, Martha and Thomas Jenkins, were a fixture at the search headquarters, their faces etched with a grief that words couldn't describe. Martha would sit for hours, clutching one of Sarah's old sweaters, while Thomas paced the floor, his eyes searching the horizon for any sign of his daughter. But as the days bled into weeks, the hope began to sour into a bitter, lingering dread. No trace of Sarah was found. No clothing, no footprints, no witness who had seen anything unusual. The town of Willow Creek, once a beacon of small-town safety, became a place of whispers and sidelong glances. Everyone was a suspect, and no one was safe. The shadow of suspicion fell heaviest on Mark Jenkins, Sarah's estranged husband. Their marriage had been the talk of the town for months, and not for the right reasons. Mark was a talented carpenter, but he had a temper that could flare up like a brush fire, often fueled by a growing dependence on whiskey. They had separated only 2 months prior to Sarah's disappearance. Mark was brought in for questioning multiple times. He sat in the dim light of the interview room, his hands calloused and shaking. He claimed he had been 50 miles away, working on a remote cabin project in the next county. He had stayed overnight, he said, alone. His alibi was impossible to prove, but equally impossible to disprove. "I loved her," he told Sheriff Brody, his voice cracking, We had our problems, sure, but I would never hurt her. You have to believe me. But the town didn't believe him. Mark became a pariah. His business dried up, his friends turned away, and he eventually retreated into a life of isolation. A man haunted by a crime he insisted he didn't commit. Years passed. The missing person posters on the town square faded from bright neon to a ghostly gray, then eventually peeled away. Sarah Jenkins became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered to children about the dangers of the woods. Her parents, unable to bear the weight of the silence in Willow Creek, eventually moved to a quiet retirement community in Florida, taking their broken hearts with them. Sheriff Brody retired in 2005, the case of Sarah Jenkins the one failure that gnawed at his soul every single night. He kept a file on his desk at home, filled with every lead, every interview, every dead end. Fast forward to October 2018, 20 years to the day since Sarah vanished. Emily Carter, a 24-year-old investigative journalist based in Chicago, stood on the overgrown porch of the old Jenkins farmhouse. Emily was Sarah's niece, born just a year after the disappearance. She had grown up in the shadow of a tragedy she never witnessed, seeing the hollow look in her grandmother's eyes every Christmas and the way her grandfather would flinch at the sound of a ringing phone. To Emily, Sarah wasn't a ghost story. She was a mission. Equipped with modern investigative techniques and a perspective unclouded by the biases of the past, Emily began her own search. She started by digitizing the entire case file, looking for patterns the original investigators might have missed. She spent weeks in the local library, poring over old microfiche, and months tracking down the original witnesses, many of whom were now elderly or had moved away. Her breakthrough didn't come from a high-tech forensic lab or a secret informant. It came from a dusty cardboard box in her grandmother's attic. Martha had kept everything of Sarah's, her clothes, her books, her childhood trophies, and hidden at the very bottom of a box marked college papers was a small, leather-bound diary. It was Sarah's journal from 1998. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. The early entries were mundane lesson plans, recipes, complaints about the weather. But as she reached the summer of '98, the tone shifted. Sarah wrote about her fear of Mark's temper, the loneliness of their crumbling marriage, and then a spark of hope. A name began to appear with increasing frequency: Robert Thorne. To the people of Willow Creek, Robert Thorne was a pillar of the community. He owned Thorne's Hardware, the oldest business in town. He was a deacon at the church, a donor to the local library, and a man known for his quiet, stoic dignity. He was the last person anyone would suspect of anything untoward. But Sarah's diary told a different story. It revealed a secret, passionate affair that had begun in the aisles of the hardware store and moved to the secluded corners of the valley. Sarah wrote of Robert's intensity, his promises to take care of her, and his insistence that she leave Mark immediately. As Emily read further, the entries became more disturbing. Robert's intensity was starting to look more like obsession. He was following her, showing up uninvited at the farmhouse, and becoming increasingly volatile when she hesitated to make their relationship public. The final entry, dated October 11, 1998, the night before she disappeared, was chilling. Robert came by tonight. He was different, angry. He says he can't wait anymore. He says if I don't choose him, I'm choosing a life of misery with Mark. He wouldn't leave until I promised to meet him tomorrow morning before school. I'm scared, truly scared. He's not the man I thought he was. Emily knew she had her suspect, but a 20-year-old diary entry wasn't enough for a conviction. She needed more. She began to look into Robert Thorne's life before he arrived in Willow Creek in 1995. She discovered that he had moved from a small town in Ohio following the mysterious accidental death of a woman he had been engaged to. The case had been ruled a fall down a flight of stairs, but the whispers of foul play had never truly died down. Emily decided to do something the original investigators never had. She confronted Robert Thorne. Now 72, Robert was a shadow of the man he once was. His body bent by age, but his eyes still sharp and guarded. Emily found him sitting on a bench outside his hardware store, watching the world go by. She didn't lead with accusations. She sat down next to him and showed him a photograph of Sarah. "Do you remember her, Robert?" she asked softly. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look away. "Everyone remembers Sarah Jenkins," he replied, his voice a dry rasp. "I found her diary," Emily said. "She wrote about you. She wrote about the night you came to the farmhouse. She wrote about how scared she was." For the first time in 20 years, the mask of the respectable businessman slipped. A flicker of something, fear, regret, or perhaps just exhaustion, crossed his face. "She was supposed to love me," he whispered, almost to himself. "I gave her everything. I would have given her the world." Emily had recorded the entire conversation. She took it straight to the current sheriff, a young man named Miller who had grown up hearing about the Jenkins case. With the diary and the recording, they had enough for a search warrant. They didn't search the hardware store. They searched the old Thorne property on the edge of the creek. And there, buried beneath a layer of concrete in the floor of an old tool shed, they found her. Sarah Jenkins was finally coming home. Robert Thorne was arrested that evening. He didn't put up a fight. In the interrogation room, the same room where Mark Jenkins had once sat in despair, Robert confessed. He told them how he had gone to the farmhouse that night, how they had argued, and how, in a moment of blind, possessive rage, he had struck her. He told them how he had spent the next 20 years living a lie, a silent witness to his own horrific crime, watching as an innocent man's life was destroyed and a family was torn apart. The trial of Robert Thorne was the biggest event in the history of Willow Creek. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Mark Jenkins, now an old man himself, received a formal apology from the state, though no apology could ever return the 2 decades he had lost to suspicion and hate. As for Emily, she wrote the story that finally gave her aunt a voice. The case of the silent witness of Willow Creek became a landmark in investigative journalism, a reminder that the truth is never truly buried. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to dig for it. The darkness that lurks in the heart of a small town can be the most terrifying of all. But as long as there are those who seek the light, the truth will always find its way home. Thank you for joining us for this special presentation on Occura. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of justice and the importance of the truth, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these forgotten stories to light. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, every silence has a story. This is Occura signing off.